Everybody acts like crash bar deletes are some kind of a tire clearance mod. Like cut this shit off and your 37s will fit. Done. Easy. But the deeper I got into the front end of the Bronco, the more I realized the whole front area of this Bronco is kind of weird. Because you're not just trimming plastic and you're not just removing some kind of random bracket. You're cutting into the actual front structure of the truck. The crash bar pocket, the body mount, and the frame horn section. All of this ties together. Once you start adding bigger tires, caster, aftermarket bumpers, more leverage, more weight, and actual off-road use, suddenly the front of the Bronco stops being simple. It starts becoming one big compromise. So instead of hacking the crash bar pocket off and pretending I solved the problem, I started asking a better question. How do I make this front end make more sense? And honestly, it turned into a whole fucking rabbit hole. I'm John and this is Project Kehm. No sponsors, no discount codes, nothing for free. Just me in the garage trying to figure out if I'm making my Bronco better or just heavy as shit. This whole thing started with a bumper search. At first, I thought I was just comparing bumpers. Weight, material, mounting points, you know, normal shit. But the more I looked, the more I realized that bumper weight doesn't really tell you anything. A bumper can be heavy as hell and transfer load like garbage. Another can be lighter and actually engineered well. So I started asking, what the hell are these bumpers actually bolted to? Because eventually, all that force goes somewhere. Trail hits, recovery load, leverage from bigger tires. All of it feeds back into the front structure. And once I started staring at that area, I kept coming back to the crash bar pocket. And honestly, I don't love it. Now, before people lose their minds, I'm not saying Ford engineers are stupid. Ford has to design their trucks around crash standards, manufacturing, cost, packaging, safety, assembly line production, and the average owner never modifying anything. That's reality, but they also didn't design it around 37s, caster correction, aftermarket bumpers, trail use, and the dumb shit we do. That's the difference. From the factory, the crash bar pocket and the body mount area are basically one bulky structure. It hangs down and it pushes into the space. And once you correct the caster and move the tire forward where it should be, that area becomes a problem fast, especially on a two-door. And this is where most people grab a cutoff wheel and just delete it. And it works. But personally, it just feels incomplete. Because if I'm going to cut factory structure off of a truck, I want a better answer than, trust me bro, is going to clear. I don't just want empty space, I want intention. That's when this stopped being about tire clearance and started being about structure. Because once you start modifying these trucks, you realize nothing works in isolation. The bumper affects leverage, the leverage affects mounting points. The mounting points affect the frame, and the tire placement affects everything around it. Instead of asking, can I fit 37s, I started asking, does the front of the truck actually make sense anymore? That's what caught my attention with this setup. It doesn't just delete the crash bar pocket, it removes that bulky section entirely and replaces it with a box structure tied back into the front section near the frame horn and body mounts. That matters. And I want to be clear, I'm not claiming this turns the Bronco into a trophy truck. I didn't lab test it, I didn't crash test it. I'm not pretending I got secret engineering data, but mechanically, it makes logic sense to me. Replacing a bulky compromised section with a cleaner, more intentional structure while gaining clearance. That just feels like a better move than just cutting things off and hoping. A basic delete would have been easier, cut, paint, done. But you already know that's not how I operate. I don't do things half-ass. If I'm cutting into the truck, I'd rather improve it while I'm there, not just make space. This ties directly back to the bumper conversation, because the more I researched bumpers, the more I hated how vague everything is. Strong, engineered, heavy duty. All right, cool. But what does that actually mean? Where does the load go? How does it transfer? What does it actually do into the vehicle? Most companies don't show that, and that's what started this rabbit hole. Not the bumper itself, but how the whole front structure works together. Because eventually, you stop bolting parts onto the vehicle and start changing the vehicle itself. And nobody really shows that part. They show installs, and they show finished builds. They don't show standing in the garage thinking, if I cut this apart, am I improving it? Or just creating a new problem? That's where this build is now. This isn't for everyone. You are cutting the truck. It isn't a simple bolt-on mod. This is cutoff wheel, sparks flying, standing there questioning your life decisions. And depending on the setup, you might even involve welding too. This is real modification territory. But personally, I'd rather make a deliberate change than keep smashing tires into factory limitations. Yeah, some people are going to ask about airbags, but you got to remember, these systems are driven by sensors and algorithms. They're not going to deploy just because some metal changed shape. That doesn't suddenly just break the system. So what am I trying to accomplish? Yeah, better tire clearance, that's the starting point. But beyond that, cleaner packaging, room for proper geometry, more intentional structure. something that actually matches where this build is going. Because this stopped being a stock Bronco a while ago. Now it's somewhere between daily driver, trail rig, engineering experiment, financial mistake. So that's why I bought this. Not for the internet points, not because cutting this truck is cool, but because the more I looked at the front end, the more this made sense. It clears the tire, it cleans up the structure, it replaces compromise with intention. And now, we're about to find out if I'm right. And originally, this was gonna be the next video, but while I was editing all of this, I ended up saying screw it and installed the whole thing anyways. And honestly, I'm glad I did. Because now this stops being theory and becomes whether any of this made sense in the real world. Because eventually there's a moment where you stop researching, stop overthinking, and stop looking at diagrams online. And finally, grab the Sawzall and cut into a perfectly good Bronco. And that first cut, that's the moment this whole thing became real. So before I could even start cutting, the skid plate had to come off. Then the body mount bolt. And on the passenger side, that thing absolutely fought me the whole fucking way. The impact wrench wouldn't budge it, so I had to break out the breaker bar. I was getting 1/4-inch turns with every effort, and believe me, cuss words were flying out of my mouth. Then I had to loosen the intercooler bracket and swing it out of the way. Otherwise, there's no clean way to get there and make the cut properly. And from there, it was finally time to cut the old structure out with the Sawzall. After which, I cleaned everything up with a grinder, then primered and painted before the new structure even went in. Because if I'm gonna cut into the truck, I want to at least do it the right way. And at some point during all this, Jack decided it was a perfect time to crawl up under the Bronco and supervise. Which honestly felt less like support and more like OSHA showing up unannounced. And once the factory structure came out, that's when things got interesting. Because I've always associated weight with strength. Heavier equals stronger, more steel equals better. And the factory setup, it feels substantial when you pull it out. Big, bulky, heavy. So naturally, I threw it on the scale just to see how much it weighed. And the crazy part? The structure I removed weighed roughly 12 pounds per side. And compared to the new LOBO setup, roughly 6 pounds per side. So across both sides, I actually reduced the weight by 12 pounds total. And in a world of mods where every upgrade somehow adds weight, this actually felt like a win. But I'll be honest, the weight difference initially freaked me out a little. The new setup, it felt more intentional, but not nearly as heavy. I generally wondered if I was removing something Ford designed for a bigger reason, crash bars aside. Which really surprised me because I truly expected the Ford structure to be a little bit more integrated. And the more I looked at the new setup, the more I realized that strength isn't just throwing steel at something. Intentional design matters too. That was probably the biggest takeaway from this whole install. And surprisingly enough, the install went pretty smoothly, especially after watching Lobo's install video. The driver's side went together pretty smoothly. The passenger side, that's another story. The passenger side holes didn't line up perfectly. Could have been Ford tolerances, could have been Lobo. Honestly, it was hard to say. I'm leaning a little bit more towards Ford. The factory holes already look somewhat oblong, kind of like somebody drilled once and thought, whoops, better try this again. But eventually I got everything pulled into place. But then, in the middle of all my frustration on the passenger side, I realized I forgot to install the body mount before tightening everything down. And at this point, no way in hell was I about to remove it. Lobo has you install these body mounts before you bolt this onto your frame. They give you a larger opening on the back side to do this. I had to work it through the smaller opening on the outside, but I managed to do it. Then I had to jack the body up off of the frame so I can squeeze that mount in. So doing all this afterwards, not really any fun, but eventually I got everything installed and snugged down properly. And visually, the difference is huge. The wheel opening finally makes sense now. I can finally move the tire where it should be for caster correction without the truck fighting itself, especially on a two-door. And now that bulky factory structure is gone, you can finally see the stance of the Bronco properly. The tire placement, the wheel openings, the proportions, it finally looks intentional. And ironically, now that it's installed, the factory skid plate is the ugly part. Before it kind of blended into that bulky factory structure. Now, it sticks out like the next problem I need to solve. Which is pretty much how modifying vehicles work. You fix one compromise, you expose the next one. So, do I fully understand every engineering decision Ford made here? No. There may absolutely be reasons the factory setup exists the way that it does, and I'm sure some of you are going to tell me. But after installing this, the front of the Bronco makes a lot more sense to me now. More room, better geometry potential, cleaner packaging. And structurally, it feels more intentional than just hacking the crash bars off and leaving the empty space behind. But now the real test starts, because the next phase is the bumper. And that's when we're going to find out whether this whole rabbit hole actually pays off, or if I've officially crossed the line from builder to a guy making terrible financial decisions in his garage. And at this point, this either proves everything I just said, or I just cut into a perfectly good truck for no reason. And if you haven't watched the Bronco video, watch that next. Because that's where this whole fucking thing started. Not just bolting parts on, but what happens after. I'm John, and this is Project Kehm.